Welcome. I know there's some great sessions happening right now, so I thank you for coming to this one, where we're going to talk a little bit about Backend. So a little bit of spiel about me. I'm a full stack engineer for the last 9 years. Very recently, or relatively recently, been working on mobile, but in the past I've done some web and API projects and some database work as well. Currently, the lead, or for the last 4 years, I've been working as the lead mobile developer on a platform called SurveyMini, and I've also done some side projects to stay current on my iOS. So a bit more about the day job. SMG is a market research company. We specialize in customer service measurement for retail and restaurant. So basically, think of receipt-based surveys and reporting on that data. And then we wrote SurveyMini in order to capture customer feedback without relying on a purchase. So when you opt into our platform, we use location services to track your visit behavior throughout the day and ask you questions when you visit interesting places. So I was on the front-end apps from day one, so did the iOS app about 4 years ago, and I've been doing enhancements since then. And then also in 2014, we did the Android app for SurveyMini. On the backend, so I thought it would be relevant to share here because it's a kind of backend talk. We use Python, PostgreSQL, Django stack, running on Amazon Web Services, and interesting fact, currently migrating from a relational database to NoSQL for scalability reasons. So with that out of the way, and I forgot to mention, I'd love to have you guys as panelists if you want to jump on SurveyMini. We have 150,000 actives throughout the country. If you want to share your opinions with interesting brands. So with that out of the way, like a lot of programmers, I tend to learn best by doing. So I thought, when I was thinking through how to structure this talk, I thought I would basically walk through a real world scenario, and we essentially build an app, and we talk through some of the decisions you have to make when somebody comes to you and says, "Can you build me an app to do X?" Which I'm sure has happened to a number of folks in the audience. So what's this app going to do? Well, we got approached by somebody running a developer conference, and they said, "Hey, I need an app to show my speakers and sessions and stuff." Great. So this app's going to show some information about the conference. We'll call it ConfApp. We'll include some speaker and session information, making sure that we can make last-minute updates if those are necessary, which they usually are. We'll include some pictures to make sure that it's more visually appealing and we know what the speakers look like. The app will be able to post some public comments for everybody to see. Track installs and sessions so that we know if anybody even downloaded it and how often they use it. And then we'll let the user log in if they want to, so we can get some interesting context about them, like their email address or Facebook picture. And then it'll also have some notifications for important announcements. Sounds pretty standard. Hope we can get all that done. So cool, I've got some ideas of what it's going to look like. I go back to my office, being a good iOS developer, and draw up some great screens that look really nice and immersive. Make sure to stay compliant with iOS human interface guidelines. Perhaps even engage with the designer to make things look really polished. But something's missing. How will somebody who submits a comment from one install of the app be able to see, or how will somebody be able to see a comment that somebody else submitted? How are we going to be able to update those speakers in real time? How will we be able to send a notification initiated by an admin to the front end build? And I'm sure you guys all know where I'm going with this. The answer to all of those questions is a backend, right? It will be the source of truth for our apps. Our apps are kind of the client, and they show some data, but ultimately we need some way to store that data centrally, and it would be the kind of go-to. So that's where we'll keep our speakers and sessions and comments would go there as well and get sent back out. Same with pictures. We need to find a place to keep those in case speakers want to update their pictures. Notifications get pushed up, and app session and user or session and install data will be sent back. Very cool. So here's our first obstacle to delivering ConfApp by our client's deadline, conference start date. We spent the last couple of years honing our native iOS chops and getting really good at that, but building this backend will require solving a new set of problems, including security, database modeling, server maintenance, OS upgrades. So the way I see it, you have two options. You can hire someone to build the backend for you. So it'll take you time to find them. Hopefully, maybe you have somebody already. If you don't, you'll have to find them and then kind of make sure they know their stuff, and you can work together. They'll be an expert in some sort of backend technology like PHP or Java or Python. Or because this is a fairly common problem for mobile developers, in recent years there have been more companies offering mobile backend as a service to provide sort of the plumbing that you need to run your apps and really be able to focus on user experience, which is what we're all really good at. So one of the first and most well-known examples of this was a company called Parse. They were founded in 2011 and provide many of these shared features that until then mobile developers had to build themselves. Some of the advantages of using Parse included the quick to get started with SDK, the generous free tier, which I took full advantage of, and had some great dashboards as well. So I first heard about Parse at a hackathon. I was doing with some friends, and I said, hey, I should check this thing out. So in the next few years, I had an opportunity to do exactly that. And I'm kind of going to share a couple examples. I'm sure you guys have similar stories. So a couple friends came to me and said, hey, we know you can do survey apps. Why don't you build it? Why don't we build something where we can ask each other questions about where to eat and like what to wear? So we went ahead and did that. We never actually published it, but kind of the major accomplishment there was being able to pilot it with 100 of our friends, and it was super exciting to see the Parse dashboard when active users were climbing and things were rocking and rolling. Similarly, when I had to make some changes to SurveyMini to rebuild some of the location services components that we were using with iOS 8, I chose to split out kind of that integration into a separate project. Again, spun it up on Parse, ran this app called Samply on a bunch of people's phones, and again, it really provided a great backend, very quick backend to spin up, and again, very much free for me. I didn't have to pay for anything. And then lastly, I had another example of using building a utility for a client on the side, and again was able to use Parse to pilot or to kind of iterate with my client, and spent no money on it, and I really had a lot of time to focus on UX. So things were great. Things were too great. As you can imagine, and this is a little history, but I'm going to talk through my scenario here. As you can imagine, other people were taking advantage of the free tier as well. It was very generous, and before, and it wasn't long before we all woke up on January 28th of this year and read a blog post titled "Moving On." Essentially, Facebook bought them in 2013, and earlier this year, and it had a bunch of people using the app, people using the backend. And earlier this year, they said, "Hey, we're not really in the infrastructure business. We're going to shut this thing down within a year." So that was an interesting moment for me in my developer journey, because I'm so used to working with hard facts and libraries. But this is really my first time experiencing like kind of a disappointing sadness of I thought all these dependencies that I always use are always going to be around. SQL Server is going to be around forever, right? I'd never thought that this backend thing that I was depending on for some of my projects isn't going to be there anymore. So it's kind of a bummer. A lot of people felt the same way. I certainly wasn't the only one. I found some examples of Eventbrite, Vivo, and even the White House had an app running on Parse. So what now? Well, fortunately, it's no longer 2011. And there are tons of options if you're looking for a platform to manage your mobile backend needs. You can certainly still build your own, and if you have the budget and expertise, I would encourage you to do that, especially if it's going to be an app that's going to scale. You can also run the open source Parse server, which is an interesting option, and that's kind of where Parse wants you to go, or Facebook wants you to go. But I would argue that you're using Parse to save time, and if you're having to install a Parse server on one of these hosting providers, and then you're also having to contribute to the open source project to kind of get the features that you need, it sort of defeats the purpose of having it. So I don't like that option very much. I found a couple others, and there are quite a few. I'm going to give a quick overview of other options that you should consider. Kinvi is a great one. Based out of Boston. I found some. I didn't find a ton of great ways to differentiate, but what I sort of came out of this with is Kinvi has a lot better integrations, and so they sort of tend to target more enterprise clients. You can certainly use Microsoft Azure. There was a great talk yesterday about Azure, and full disclosure, I used to be a .NET developer, so I've used it as well, and I quite liked it. Heroku, which I found tends to be pretty popular with startups, so certainly a lot of big players are using them as well. And then Firebase, which I know has a really big developer following, and I think happens to be a sponsor here, so they're absolutely great also. So my kind of point on the slide is that there are a lot of options. And I think it's less important, and they were fairly comparable as far as features, especially when we talk about the basics like push notifications and NoSQL database. They all have them. I think it's more important to find one that you like and stick with it, and just become familiar with it and make sure it doesn't go away essentially. And so for me, and this is my humble opinion, and I've sort of told you all my experience, Amazon Web Services is where it's at. And I'm going to try to convince you that you should think that as well. So why do I like AWS? They are a pioneer in the cloud computing marketplace since 2006, when they were some sort of side project that eventually became its own entity. That was about a year before the iPhone came out, so certainly has been around a bit. Also, and I forgot to mention, I've been working with AWS for 4 years. First on SurveyMini, but also then when I needed to find a Parse replacement for my side projects. Anyway, so moving back to why AWS is great. They're a pioneer in the infrastructure business. People still consider them to be the market leader in a lot of ways. I've got some charts here that show how much of the market share and revenue they have. I also found that Gartner did a study and estimated that they have more compute capacity than the next 14 players combined, which I think is a staggering stat. And it really tells you that they have the best. When they talk about economies of scale, they really have that check mark by a lot. They have a large community of developers, 18,000, I believe, attended the conference last year. And last but certainly not least, they have great documentation. It's extensive and it's a lot better than some platforms I've worked with. So, having learned a lesson from Parse, right? We should be skeptical about introducing a new platform dependency into our workflow. But I would argue that if you optimize for longevity and robustness, kind of being able to do everything you want to do, you can't really beat AWS. They're a $9 billion business and growing, which I think is enormous. Amazon.com runs on AWS, which says a lot. And they have a large number of nonprofit and government agencies using them as well. And I found some evidence that the CIA used them at some point, and I would imagine still do. So lots of big players, lots of small players are on AWS. If you're still not convinced, this is what's always in the back of my mind. This is kind of their marketing, who uses us. And I always think of Netflix as the kind of primary example. You know, if Netflix is around, then my app's going to be around running on AWS. So my point here is kind of if you think you're going to be, if you're not going to scale beyond where Netflix is, you should probably trust Amazon. Same with these other wonderful services I'm sure you've used. So when it comes to pricing, we're all familiar with that 30 requests per second that Parse did, which I thought was awesome and was one of the reasons why they maybe didn't stick around. It's a bit more complicated on the Amazon side. The free tier is definitely generous for the first 12 months, but you do have to look at the individual services that you're using and kind of calculate that as you go. But I will say that because of those large economies of scale, it is safe to say that if you are paying for anything when you're piloting your app, it will be the cheapest price you can get for that particular compute or cloud unit of whatever you're using. So now we've done a bit of analysis on it, and we feel pretty good writing our ConfApp on it. Let's jump right in and open up the services tab. But wait, there are so many services. It's true. A lot of people find it difficult to get started with. Some of the reasons include the 70+ services available, the fact that there's quite a bit of some configuration involved, but I'll show you some ways to make that easier. And just purely the number of TLAs and the kind of proprietary vernacular they use makes it a bit difficult to know where to get going. So in my experience, there are 2 ways to get started. You can start with one service to do a specific task in your workflow, for instance, saving some files on simple storage services, or S3. Or you can jump into, because of this market trend toward mobile developer experience, they're offering something called AWS Mobile Hub, which you can jump into, and I think you'll find it's essentially a facade around some of their underlying services with some tools built on top, which I found pretty helpful. And then it feels quite a bit like a mobile backend as a service provider, but you kind of know that there's quite a bit more behind it, which is exciting for me. So for the rest of this talk, I'm going to focus on Mobile Hub and what you can expect when you're working with it. Everything you get is free, sort of. You're still paying for the S3 storage unless you're in the free tier, but you do get quite a few niceties available to you at no charge. And then it still supports the very basic features that we talked about earlier for a mobile backend as a service. So push notifications, app analytics, cloud logic, user sign-in, all of it's available. So back to ConfApp, right? Deadline's approaching. We need to get started. I'll try to show you how I would go about building ConfApp on AWS. It's not intended to be a step-by-step guide, so I sort of touch on high-level, or I show code and terminal commands and stuff, but it's I skip a few steps here and there. But it should give you some exposure to the tools, terminology, and process involved. So high-level dev roadmap. We need to be able to get some data, right? So we need to get some speaker information and session information out. We need to be able to do some pictures, so we know what speakers look like. We need to be able to post some data for comments, and then obviously log in, not required, but useful. And same with notifications, keep people engaged. So when you first sign up for your AWS account and get into Mobile Hub under Services, you'll find a dashboard that looks like this. That allows you to pick and choose which features you want in your app or in your app backend. I found the configuration for these to be fairly straightforward, or relatively straightforward, right? So you still have to do all the iTunes Connect setup with push notifications, and if you want Facebook login, you still have to do the developer.facebook stuff. But they quite simplify it for you, and I thought it was pretty easy to walk through. One of my favorite features of Mobile Hub is the generated project they give you. Certainly not a new concept, other people do it, but when I really dug into this Xcode project that they built for me when I configured all the components I wanted, I found that it had some great, strongly typed models for me to use. It provided all the proper AWS config settings in the info plist, which was super easy to grab, and I found that to be kind of a sticky issue before when I was not using Mobile Hub. And it actually had some nice design patterns in the app as well that I wasn't familiar with, which was kind of fun to dig into. And another kind of pro tip, maybe it's obvious if something does stop working in your app in production later on, this would be a great place to come back and confirm that the backend is or is not at fault for your issue, because this project is basically guaranteed to be working as long as you compile it, or as long as you build it from Mobile Hub. So our first dev item, we gotta get some data from the backend. These are the high-level steps I took. This shows you my kind of full stack mindset. I think about backend stuff and front-end stuff, and I'll try to walk through both. So on the backend, we have to configure that NoSQL database with a table called speakers. We have to set up some command line tools, which are kind of optional, but I thought were useful to do. Set up a little bit of permissions, which was interesting, and then upload a kind of a pre-built JSON file that I'll show you. Then on the front end, we'll make a new project. Excuse me. Make a new project, add a CocoaPod, and set up some credentials, and then wire up some UI. So starting with the database, back on that dashboard, created a NoSQL database. This is the configuration page for it. So the table is called speakers. Important to note that whichever column, and it may be hard to read, so I apologize, but it's important to note that whichever column you specify as being the partition key and has to be unique. If you submit the same key, it'll cause an update instead of an insert, which I kind of didn't realize at first. So I set up a speaker name, which will be our partition key, and a session name, which will be an additional attribute. So if you've worked with relational databases before, this might seem like setting up a schema, but that's not the case. With NoSQL, you can submit arbitrary attributes as part of your insert, and they'll get added to, they'll just be part of that item without causing an error. But this is just a way to give Mobile Hub some hints about what kind of attributes our models should have. And I found that to be pretty useful down the road. So we make this table. Next, we'll do some tools and credentials. And this is the least visual step that I have here, but I thought was interesting and worthwhile to note. So I created it introduces a new concept called Identity and Access Management, or IAM. Very cleverly titled IAM. So created a user, attached the proper policy, which is Amazon DynamoDB full access. So we're able to populate our DynamoDB with speaker information. And then the second piece, and this is the optional one because we could have used our Swift SDK to populate the speakers, but I found it to be a little quicker to just install these command line tools and with pip, and then did a AWS configure and provided those credentials I created earlier. And that'll just allow us to upload that JSON file. So without further ado, we've got this JSON file formatted, and we're going to upload it. If you notice, it's got the name of the table that we're using, and it's got an array of put requests with individual items. And I've got a couple speakers in there. I ended up uploading a few more, but I cut them out so you can see this better. I found this format to be relatively straightforward after I got used to it. At first, I didn't quite have my put requests arranged correctly, but if you see a couple of examples, and if you've worked with JSON before, which I'm sure a lot of you have, I think you'll find it pretty straightforward after a while. So I created this file. I did AWS DynamoDB batch write item. That's what those CLI tools were for. And boom, we've got speakers in the database. So switching back to Xcode, a little context switch here. But these steps should absolutely be familiar. set up a new project, initialize CocoaPods, added AWS DynamoDB CocoaPod, did pod install. Don't have a ton of specifics around CocoaPods. I'm sure a lot of you have worked with them. If you haven't, there's some excellent resources online. And then another step that I wanted to point out, and again, maybe a refresher for a lot of folks, but if you've worked with any third-party libraries that make network requests, or even if you've tried to make your own unsecured network request from an iOS 9 or later build, you'll find that you get an error that has something to do with app transport security. Basically, you have to whitelist the particular URLs you want to use to make unsecured requests. And a lot of, I found Facebook requires you to do this, so does DynamoDB. So configured that. On to some code. So this is really the only config I had to do, because Mobile Hub did such a nice job of attaching the right policies with the right permissions to our identity pool ID. All I had to do was specify in the Xcode project which identity pool ID I'm using. And so this is one of the concepts I found a little confusing when I first started working with AWS, but it's just a way of saying this is, if you're an unauthorized user, so kind of like anonymous users in Parse, if you're an unauthorized user, this is the sort of pool of, or this is the kind of group that you belong to, and the permissions that are set up on the back end or in AWS are the ones you should have. And so to use a lot of the features that you configured in Mobile Hub, all you really have to do is assign the proper identity pool ID. You could also put this in your info key list, which is what the generated project did, and that's where I got the identity pool ID out of. And then configure service configuration. I think that's all I had on this one. Cool. So then this is the generated model that I got from the generated project. It's pretty straightforward, a lot like if you've subclassed PF object in Parse. Basically just tells the API what the table name is, what the key is, and then gives us some hints about how to parse JSON. So we'll come back to this one, but this I just copied directly out of the other project. And this is why we told Mobile Hub what to expect. And then as far as the query, there are two operations supported, very similar to other NoSQL databases. You've got a query where you have to specify either the key, or the partition key, or some filters, or you can just do a basic scan, which will start reading data from the beginning, but you do have to specify some limits on it. So, and I happen to have fewer than 10 speakers, so I just said, give me the first 10. There's some nice APIs for kind of getting the next 10 if you're scrolling through it, but it sort of encourages you to be in a good pattern of not doing just a select star. Then, if there are no errors, we grab our items, assign them to our local speakers property, and pop out to the main thread to reload the table view. Pretty straightforward. So then wiring up the table view cell should look super familiar. Basically just using that strongly typed, so casting over to speaker object, to a strongly typed speaker object, and then using the attributes on it to assign to our text label and detail label. So again, very similar to PF object. And hey, we have some speakers. Cool. It's not very pretty. It's a start. Next, we'll try to make it a bit prettier with some speaker photos. This will also give us a little exposure to S3 or simple storage services, which you can access directly through the services menu. There's not a tab for it on Mobile Hub, but it's sort of my other way of getting started. Just use S3. So high-level tasks, backend, upload some images to S3, make them public, put the public URLs in our speaker JSON, upload it. Then update speakers.swift with some new attributes. That'll be super easy. Pull down the image data and assign it to our image view. Piece of cake. So to get we get some pictures from our client. We've got some beautiful, properly cut up assets to use. Then all we have to do is create a new bucket which you can think of as S3's version of a folder. So we create a new bucket. We call it ConfApp speakers. We put it in the US East region, and then we upload them. All can be done through the web interface, and pretty straightforward. You watch them getting uploaded. Then, by default, any assets you upload to S3 are private. And there is a nice API for like creating a token, a URL with a token in it to make them public for a certain amount of time if you want to kind of keep them secured. And I've certainly done that before, but in this case, I think it's fair to make them public. So I selected all of them, clicked Make Public, no problem. And then the steps sort of not mentioned here, but back on this page, if you right-click on Properties there on the individual photos, you can get the actual URL for each individual image. And it'll have something like s3.amazon.com /bucket name /image, which is super useful. And so you see that URL in here, right? So grab that for each one, put it into our speakers JSON file as a new attribute. This is just on my local copy, right? As long as I keep the speaker name the same, I'm able to upload this file again, and instead of an insert, I just get an update. Another thing to maybe point out here is just the type is again string, so no fancy URL type. Cool, and then again using CLI, we re-upload to DynamoDB. This is sort of the standard output you expect to see, no unprocessed items. And like I mentioned, because the speaker names are consistent, it causes an update, and there is no duplicate. There are no duplicate rows. Cool. So back to front end, we've got some. We now know that we have an image URL. We end up adding that to our model as well as to our JSON parsing code. Not too difficult. And then to wire up getting those images is in my self-wrote index path. I grab that URL, jump out to the background thread, and make sure I can do the heavy lifting there. Pull down the data, and then back on the UI thread, assign it to my image view. So super standard. Just wanted to kind of show off all the steps it took to introduce a new attribute and get it into our app. And hey, cool, a little bit prettier, right? Still responsive, looks nice. Get some images down. So this might be a good time to actually do some testing. And we don't have time. Who has time to manually step through these screens? So this is a good segue into another interesting feature, which is Device Farm. Also available on other platforms, but I found this one to be pretty easy to work with. So you have to export an archive of your build, upload it to Device Farm, configure some context around your tests, and then review the results. Export's pretty simple. We've all done an archive. We save for ad hoc deployment. We just save the IPA. When you go configure your test, you name it, you upload your build. One thing to note here is that they required me to do iOS 8.1 as my target because their virtual devices are, or maybe physical devices are, require that to be compatible. So I made an 8.1 app, named my run. You can set up some context here too. So a couple of features I found interesting. I noticed that there's a way to say, hey, you have to have these other apps installed, which I was thinking, what's the scenario here? But I think it's the kind of, we've worked with stuff, like we've got a couple apps published by the same publisher, so potentially like verifying that device ID for vendor comes back the same across both apps. But I'm sure you can think of other interesting scenarios that would require other apps to be installed for context. You've got location. You can specify location, specify locale. Pretty cool. And then you run it. So after 22 minutes and a quick latte, we completed our smoke test on 5 different devices. So I use the built-in, they call it a fuzz test, but I believe it's just open up the app and rotate the screen and make sure nothing breaks. That's built in. You can certainly define your own. There were quite a few frameworks that they supported: JUnit, TestMG, XCTest, XCTest UI, and a few others. So I'm sure if you're into testing, you'll find one that you're able to work with. And then another cool bit to show off here is that it does capture all the screenshots across all devices, across all the orientations for you, and I was able to review these while sipping on my latte, and everything looked pretty nice. And you can certainly do more complex tests, but this is what you get out of the box. So this being a 45-minute talk, I was quite ambitious when I started. Thought I could implement all these things, but certainly can't. So I thought I would run through the rest of them as kind of the next steps. So our app's not really ready for a design award or the App Store, but it's a start. So my roadmap for additional features would be to use, again, DynamoDB for submitting the comments, and that was fairly simple. You just use the save operation they have, and then you'd probably use a scan or some sort of fetch that had a partition key in it. You can do login with Cognito, which is a little different from IAM. Cognito is kind of more of their kind of mobile app-facing service, and it has nice integrations for Facebook and Twitter login, as well as SAML support, which I found interesting. Push notifications work with SNS, Simple Notification Services. SNS also has support for email and text message, as well as all your push notification on iOS and Android. And then analytics was interesting. So you get the analytics, like the active sessions and installs, just by linking against the SDK. But if you want to get more fancy with it and do like custom events like they mentioned, monetization events, or other various interesting things the user does, you could bring in the AWS Mobile Analytics SDK and do that. And then certainly, last but not least, you can do lots of business logic things with Lambda, and Lambda just gives you the ability to write kind of code and run backend code without having to provision any servers, much like Cloud Code did for you in Parse. But in addition to having Node.js support, they also have Python and Java support. So if you're a Python person, you can certainly use that. So to kind of do a recap, things to remember: third-party dependencies are necessary, but should be evaluated carefully. So if you're going to use AWS, make sure to know what the risks are. I do think that AWS is as safe a choice as you can have as far as infrastructure. It's got a powerful set of features, and it's most likely not going anywhere. To get started, jump into a particular service or use Mobile Hub. I think both are nice ways to get started, and you'll find you're fairly productive after a while. And then with Mobile Hub, like I said, use that generated project to verify the backend, because should be pretty confident that it's going to work. Some resources, and a lot of these are AWS documentation, but I think that's kind of the next step. If you're interested in all the stuff that I was telling you about, probably checking out these pages would be good. Like I said, very, very excellent documentation. Definitely a pleasure to work with. And CocoaPods, I'm sure you've been to that site, but if you haven't, check it out for third-party dependency management in Xcode. And that's all I have. Thank you for sticking around. I'm happy to answer any questions, or feel free to reach out to me later.